Good evening and welcome to Special Broadcast. I'm your host, Ammad Quraishi, and I'm sitting here with Dr. Jelani Cobb, who is currently a professor at the Columbia University School of Journalism and a staff writer for The New Yorker. Thank you for being here, Dr. Cobb.
Thank you for the invitation.
We're just going to get right into the topic, and your work is what really fascinates us. Your work focuses on race and racial relations, but I'd like to start with the issue of identity.
Mm-hmm.
It's often believed that the black experience is significantly different from the white experience. Do you think you could sum up some of those differences for us?
I think it's really the kind of one of the foundational differences in the country, in the history. So we have, one part of the population that is heir to that creed of freedom and independence and democracy that was enshrined in the founding documents of this country. The American Revolution was fought to secure, these rights. And another part of the population that understands that from the perspective of people who are specifically denied those rights, from the underside of the country, from the inception of this country, when we have this explosion of democracy, and then one portion of the population that understands it through the lens of the enslaved person who's denied that. And so it's the same way of saying, like, the differences in identity and the differences in experience are the person who's sitting in a restaurant eating a magnificent buffet and the person who's standing outside looking through the window with their stomach growling. And so those are the differences in terms of our origins of our relationship to this country. And it proceeds from there. Now, of course, those two things are like intimately bound, like they can't exist without each other. But that's where we begin to have this distinction between what came to be black identity in this country and what came to be the identity of the majority of this population diverged at the very beginning.
So it's essentially two different realities
right.
being lived by
right.
Black Americans and white Americans.
Right.
But do they contribute to a new identity as generations pass, or is it more so that they evolve and wedge a deeper divide between the two? Interestingly,
I think the answer is both. Because there is that shared understanding of what it is to be American in some context, especially for a person who travels abroad. Like when you go abroad, people understand you as an American, irrespective of your skin color. But within the country, your identity and your citizenship is in many ways mediated by race and skin color. And we've replicated this generation after generation after generation. And at the same time, you have this popular culture, in this country of, blues or jazz or rock, or hip hop, these cultural products. They're very much connected to the history of black people in this country, but have been the basis for a whole spectrum of American culture. And I don't mean this simply to be black people. I mean, there's a whole kind of array of groups that have come here and contributed in these different ways. And so our experience is mediated by these things in this common language. But at the same time, we have this ancestral problem of race that gets reinforced generation after generation after generation.
Is there a specific way that it could be reconciled, or is it something that doesn't need to be reconciled in the effect that I believe it was President Barack Obama in his speech in 2004 that really pushed him into the spotlight? He said that there is no Black America, no white America, no Latino America, there's the United States of America. Is it something that we effectively choose to ignore, that there are these realities, that's why it's not being reconciled?
So it's interesting that Barack Obama, that was tremendously effective campaign rhetoric, but we shouldn't confuse campaign rhetoric with actual sociological reality. Because the speech in 2004 that he gave, which was an optimistic, to say it lightly, an optimistic view of American society as it pertains to race and divisions, gave rise to a presidency that was defined and hobbled by the issue of race. We saw time and time again dynamics of, even the most outrageous which is, him being forced to show his birth certificate to prove that he was even a citizen, and that had racial content to it. And then even more obscenely, the person who foisted this lie upon the public was then elected to succeed him. And so, yes, there was a Black America that had a different experience from white America, which had a different experience in many regards from a Latino America. Mm-hmm. And by glossing over those distinctions, it only makes it more difficult for us to ultimately address them.
He was cautious on the campaign trail of his statements whenever there would be issues of police brutality. This cautiousness was not seen this past election year. Is it that people just don't care, or is it that people genuinely believe that we're a post-racial society and we can talk about these issues as if they're nothing?
Obama, because he's a Black person in America, understood race in a way that very many white people don't, because we have to live with it, whereas it may be optional for other people to engage it. And there's also the idea that anything you say relating to race will be offensive to someone, especially as a Black person. It's very easy to offend the sensibilities of white people if you're talking honestly about race and how it works in this society. And so there were more downsides than upsides anytime Barack Obama talked about race. The least kind of most innocuous statement could become inflammatory. And you even saw instances of people saying that Obama was quote unquote responsible for racism being in the country, which is a kind of absurdist spin, about how race actually has worked here. By the same token, Trump was speaking to people who had a sense of themselves being aggrieved, not simply by Black people, but also by immigrants and Muslims and all these other populations whom they felt they were being taken advantage of by. And so they had the luxury of the majority to be able to speak in ways that were that disregarded the experiences of minorities. And that has always been a luxury in this country. And so it's not entirely surprising that Trump was able to say kind of racially inflammatory and reckless things throughout this course of his campaign. And Obama really could not afford to ever do that.
So effectively it was that luxury was like a consequence-free speech.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
But would you say that there was a paradox of the Obama presidency in terms, I believe in your book, Substance of Hope, Paradox of Progress. What exactly is the paradox of an Obama presidency?
So I think we saw it play out. One of the things was that you would have these moments of progress, and seated within those moments of progress would be the efforts at retrenchment and regression. And so we see this again and again in this history. There's the backlash that happens after emancipation. There's a backlash that happens after the Great Migration. There's a backlash that happens after the Civil Rights Movement. And there's a backlash, a social and political backlash that happens after Barack Obama's election. And so the paradox of progress was that we saw this tremendously euphoric moment and knew if we were honest about the history of the country, should have known that there would be something that looked like this that would come as a consequence of it.
Does it have any particular policy implications?
Sure.
Considering the Shelby County versus Holder case that effectively gutted the Voting Rights Act. Right. Is there a need for concern or caution or alarm in times now because of such of a case and the backlash that we saw from this past administration?
Yeah, absolutely. And people are concerned about voting rights. People are concerned about the environment and environmental protections very much have particular implications for low-income communities of color. People are concerned about where the Department of Justice is going to go in terms of accountability for police departments, which it doesn't seem like there will be very much of, about where we're going to go. Like for the first time in, I forget how many years, the number of people who were incarcerated actually decreased last year. And we had decades in which each year more people were being sent to prison. So it was a kind of hopeful sign that maybe we had reached an inflection point where we said that, having the largest incarcerated population in the industrial world was enough of a badge of shame that perhaps we should start thinking about doing things differently. I think that probably will be abandoned. That sense will probably be abandoned to a kind of heedless catering to fear in this administration that will likely generate more people who are incarcerated. So there are lots of public policy implications that we have to be mindful of here.
It seems as though that incarceration effectively continued the issue of racism throughout the nation and throughout time, and that racism effectively served a purpose. Because in the past it was material extraction of wealth, and now through incarceration it's to push a certain voting bloc, I suppose, as you pointed out in your speech. When will racism cease to be useful in this country, and do you have hope that it will?
I do have hope, if only because I think that the battles that we have to face currently are smaller. They're large, but they're still smaller than the battles that people had to face a generation ago or 2 generations ago. And we should always think of ourselves as having the wind at our back. But in very real terms, and I forgot your question just that quickly.
It was when will racism?
Oh, when will racism? So racism will cease when it no longer, when the cost of it exceeds the benefit of it, and has been very beneficial for a particular set of people through the duration of this country. And when we can create such a state of affairs that it is too costly a habit to hold on to, we will actually have a hope of seeing social change.
It's a beautiful answer. Way to end the broadcast. Thank you for being here. We are out of time. This is a special broadcast. I'm your host, Ammad Quraishi, and this was Dr. Jelani Cobb.
Thank you.